everyone, and welcome back to another English with Dry. Today, we're going to take a look at the first of Macbeth's major monologues in Act 1, Scene 7. Now, the text begins with him debating whether or not he should kill Duncan. If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all here. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we'll jump the life to come. But in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poison chalice to our own lips. Now, the first note to make here is that he begins with an if. Now, this conjunction really kind of highlights how uncertain that he is about what he should do. He is totally lost. He has been spoken to by the witches. They have prophesied that he will become the king one day, but he is thinking it through in his own head, and he is entirely unconvinced that this is the correct course of action. He then, you will notice, uses the word done 3 times in quick succession, this repetition. And it kind of indicates that he is desperate for the murder to be over. What he really means is, if this murder could be done and trammel up the consequence, i.e. cover up anything, and so nobody would know what he'd done, then he would happily do it. You know, if there was nothing, no repercussions that he would face, then fine. He wouldn't even think twice about it. But it's these consequences that he is worried about. Now, interestingly, he says, with his surcease success. Now, that sounds great. What it actually means is surcease's, demise or death or literally ending. So if he's saying there that if Duncan could be ended, if you like, then he would succeed, and that would be it. But then he says the be-all and end-all here, okay? Now, that is him showing straight away, because here he clearly means the mortal world, i.e. he is aware that regardless of what happens, whether he's caught or not, if he were to kill Duncan, he would be damned in the afterlife. He says, but here upon this bank and shoal of time. Now, this metaphor is interesting. It kind of compares the mortal world that he lives in as being, well, he says it's the bank and shoal. Now, that's the idea of it being the kind of shallow water just in from the sea. And then, of course, what that means is the afterlife is the whole wide ocean, okay? Now, he's aware that in this afterlife, we jump the life to come, i.e. we'd almost forfeit it. We would put ourselves in this situation where we are damned for all eternity by doing this. However, currently right here is the kind of time that he is more worried about facing consequence. He says we still have judgment here. Now, what you'll notice, interestingly, is that he uses the word we. Now, obviously, you can interpret that as being him and his wife. But if you're more of the opinion, which I certainly am, that he doesn't really consider his wife all that much as being part of this, then actually the we could be the royal we. How often the Queen of England refers to herself as we. One will do this, we will do this. It's this idea that the royalty or the monarchy use this collective pronoun to refer to themselves. So here it could be foreshadowing that he's already decided what he's going to do. He just doesn't know it. And then he carries on. He says that we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions. Now, judgment, there's lots of different types of judgment in this place. So this is a very loaded word. There's a lot of connotation and meaning to it. Judgment could be, of course, if he's caught, the judgment of the courts and of his, contemporaries who would clearly sentence him to a horrible and painful death. There's also the judgment from God for going against the divine right of kings and doing something quite so unholy and unnatural. There's also the judgment of the audience watching this play, which is something that Shakespeare would be aware of. And so there's kind of myriad judgment here that we have to consider. Now, the bloody instruction that he refers to is obviously becoming king by killing the existing one. And then he talks about how this might be being taught would return to plague the inventor. Now, this is his way of saying he's worried that if he becomes king through murder, and that's exactly what's going to happen to him, somebody else will take his kind of lesson and then do it that way. This even-handed justice, he says. Now, that even-handed is a really good expression because it shows that he is aware he would deserve the punishment. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. He knows that he would be doing a terribly wrong thing. Make no mistake, Macbeth and his wife are both very aware of the evil that they would be doing by murdering Duncan. And then finally, the interesting part, as we said, is that with describing it as bloody instruction, which he says being taught return to plague the inventor. Yes, he doesn't know this is going to happen, but of course he is ironically foreshadowing his own downfall, because that is exactly what happens to him in the end. So he continues, he's here in double trust, first as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity, like a naked newborn babe, striding the blast, or heaven's cherubim, horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. So the second kind of reason he starts to think of why he should not kill Duncan, because this speech is really him persuading himself not to, kind of not chickening out, although that's exactly how Lady Macbeth presents it, but him realizing that he doesn't have as much to gain as he thinks. Now, he firstly talks about the fact that Duncan would be inside his house in double trust. Now, Macbeth owes him allegiance and support for two reasons. First, that he is his kinsman, and second, that he's his subject. Now, kinsman means that and subject means that he is somebody who has to follow what Duncan says. He's the king. And of course, in this time period, the the pervading belief was that the king was God on earth. He was God's chosen representative on earth. And if you are the subject, somebody who's underneath, who owes their allegiance to this person, then obviously betraying them and murdering them is the worst thing you can do. It is similar in a lot of ways to attacking God himself. The second thing is that Macbeth is his host. Now, the fact he's his host is significant because if you are the host, then you owe somebody protection. This is an ancient belief, obviously that still comes sort of forward to the modern day, although it's less often in this day and age that somebody who comes into your house is at threat of being murdered. But of course, if you are somebody's host, then you are, they are in your hands and you are the one responsible for them. And so these are the two reasons why he cannot bear the knife himself. It would be wrong on two really profound levels. And furthermore, he says, Duncan has borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues, etc., etc. The faculties indicate that Duncan has been a wonderfully kind and noble ruler, somebody who the people of Scotland absolutely love. And so therefore doing this would not be unseating some kind of horrible tyrant, which again, ironically, he becomes. It would be getting rid of a popular king who does his job very well. And he says that this would then create a situation where the people were horrendously upset. He says that his virtues, he personifies them, will plead like angels. And this obviously is a clear link to God, and the divine imagery is the best way to describe it. And this emphasizes both how wrong it would be for Macbeth to do this, but also how close Duncan is to God, as if we needed a reminder that the king was literally God on earth. And then he, of course, references the idea that if Duncan was murdered, it would result in deep damnation. Now, these are plosive sounds, the Ds here, and they reflect how his murder would be an unholy act. Now, the sounds themselves have connotations of violence, and that is certainly something here that is being kind of conveyed through Shakespeare's language, that it would be a violently unholy act if somebody were to murder Duncan. So then finally, Macbeth kind of concedes, I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. Now here, this is him kind of admitting that he has actually got no motivation to murder Duncan. There's nothing to make him do it. Because you have to remember, he's been made Thane of Cawdor. He's now Thane of Glamis and Thane of Cawdor, and one of the most revered and celebrated noblemen in all of Scotland. Of course, there's a reason why, after Duncan's dead and Malcolm and Donald Bain run away, that he is the next in line. He is adored because of his service in the name of his country. And so this is a good thing. And so why would he, risk it all, if you like? The only thing he notices that he has is vaulting ambition. This ambition that he cannot get rid of. And then he describes that it overleaps itself and falls on the other. Now, this is a kind of indication that he's aware of the possibility of a great fall. Clearly, a vault is a type of jump that is designed to make you, to bring you high up, but then will ultimately result in you falling quite far. Now, this again foreshadows what ultimately happens to him. And so, if we conclude with our 5 box summary of this monologue, these are the kind of takeaway points that you need. Firstly, Macbeth in this monologue battles with whether or not he should carry out the murder of Duncan. Secondly, he fears mortal punishments far more than divine repercussions. Thirdly, he knows that if he gains the crown through murder, this could happen to him too. He could similarly be the target for a murderous plot to take his crown, because that would be the precedent he sets. Fourthly, he remembers that Duncan is such a respected ruler that will cause the country a great deal of pain and misery, and it will be, on a simple level, quite hard for him to follow. And finally, he comes to the conclusion that he has only ambition and desire for the crown, but no reason to take it. Hope this has been helpful, and I will see you next time.